Team, if you haven't yet, head on over to 3pillarsmethod.com to start a 5-day free trial on my app. This is where you can go through the entire 3 Pillars Method process to develop your own personalized nutrition plan for those weight, health, and fitness goals. That's 3pillarsmethod.com, and the link is in the show notes. Let's get into the show.
Hello and welcome to the Consistency Project Podcast. My name is Patrick Cummings. As always, I'm here with E.C. Sinkowski. Every week on the show, we aim to simplify the science of nutrition, health, and fitness, cutting through the noise to focus on the principles and practices that will help you perform better, feel better, and, of course, live better. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hello, E.C. How are you?
Great. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm good. We're going to talk about something. I saw you post something about this on social, and I kind of thought like, oh, that's a joke, right? That's not a real thing. But apparently it's a real thing. We're going to talk about the sugar diet. Yeah, we're going to talk about the sugar diet, what it is, how it quote unquote works, some of the scientific claims and whether they hold up to any scrutiny, and then why perhaps diet trends, extreme diet trends like this continue to show up and gain popularity despite all of their obvious flaws. So that's what we're going to talk about today is the sugar diet. You ready?
All right, let's try.
All right. First question, obvious question. Where did this come from and why are we talking about it?
Oh, man. Yeah, I mean, I would say in our corner of the internet, I think the most influential in terms of the sugar diet's Mark Bell. He's a former competitive powerlifter.
Yep.
Hit some pretty insane numbers. I think he's like 10th all time in some of the numbers he's hit. So pretty strong dude. Also have seen some commentary from a vegan competitive cyclist who goes by the handle Durian Rider. From what I can see on his YouTube content, he's pretty into being lean and showing that off. And then there's also Cole Robinson.
It's just such a funny way to put what I'm sure it actually is.
Yeah, didn't take me very long to get into that. And then Cole Robinson, who I really don't know much about, he seems to start every YouTube video with yelling, "Hey, fatty," and then proceeds to just yell. At some point, he was also taking borax, the laundry cleaner, in his diet. So especially the latter two, it was pretty hard to get far into the content. Definitely spent a little bit more time with Mark Bell's content. Before getting into kind of the specifics of the sugar diet, I do also want to point out that like Mark Bell was really into keto carnivore as of like 6 months ago, from what I can tell. And Cole Robinson used to really promote his snake diet, but now he's on this like sugar diet thing. I would say out of any of them, Durian Rider seems to be the most kind of consistent with this generally high carb, low fat idea. He is also a competitive cyclist, so it actually kind of aligns in that scenario. But anyway, the point that I was trying to make there is, you know, it can almost seem like from the outside that people might be like, oh, wow, these guys are really on the cutting edge of things. They're really, on the cutting edge of science or new ideas, when in reality, they're like on the cutting edge of just viral diet trends that I think at best are short-lived, but really are unsustainable, especially looking at, well, 6 months ago, you were doing pretty much the exact opposite, right? And so, I really don't love doing react stuff because I think, or commenting on stuff because I think it keeps drawing attention to these types of silly ideas. But I did get enough questions about this, and there is some interesting, perhaps potential, like half-truth science in here that we're going to weed out a little bit.
Oh man, another half-truth.
Yeah.
Couple little things first. The first, and I kid you not, the timing of this is funny. I just spent over the weekend. I went to 3 or 4 different stores looking for borax for my son because he got into YouTube videos of people making slime, and like all of them had slime or had borax as an ingredient. We couldn't find it anywhere. Apparently it still exists, but I don't know where.
Yeah.
And the second thing, which I think is really funny, is a vegan cyclist and Mark Bell, who's like this big, beefy power lifter guy. Like the fact that those two are like coalescing around this idea of the sugar diet is just curious to me.
Right.
And so let's like, what is the sugar diet? Give us a little bit of the background and the information so we can sort of be on the same page here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it kind of has different flavors depending on which influencer you're following. But very generally, the premise is you have this very high carbohydrate diet. Say you're eating 800 grams of carbs per day, not 800 grams by weight of fruits and vegetables per day, but 800 grams of carbohydrates per day, and mostly in really sugar processed forms. Then you're having a moderate level of protein. I think Mark Bell considers it low, but of course, coming out of his background, anything would be low that might be in the moderate range. And so, he'll say that he's about 200 pounds-ish or something like that. And so he's doing about 100 grams of protein. That's very moderate. That's not low, but certainly lower than where he's been historically. Yep. And then pretty low fat, let's say less than 30 grams of fat per day. And I'm going to just tell you, based on that little premise I set up of the macro distribution, this is not sustainable for anybody who wants to take part in usual social events or family dinners. I mean, just that low fat cutoff right there, it's not going to work. I mean, that's what you see, for bodybuilders getting on stage, but foods that we enjoy, you're going to be more than 30 grams of fat per day. Now, the high carbohydrate intake, this is coming from fruit juice, honey, straight up table sugar, but to include soda there, maple syrup, or candy like Sour Patch Kids, gummy bears, etc. Kind of combined with this sugar diet idea, as far as I understand, you're also going to hear the terms sugar fast. So this might be something where you do a 16-hour overnight fast, or maybe you do a multi-day fast where you're just eating those carbohydrate sources I mentioned, fruit juice, honey, table sugar or soda, maple syrup or candy during this fast window. And then you might break the fast, whenever that is, with a lean protein source to get the protein in, but again, keeping the fat low.
Okay, so this sounds like it's my 8-year-old's dream diet.
Totally.
Fruit juice, maple syrup, Sour Patch
syrup.
Kids. He'd be like, I'm in. All right, so what are the actual claims here?
Yeah.
Because there's got to be something here. Because you did say there were some truths, a little half truths in here. So maybe we can start to move into that.
Yeah, I mean, from what I glean, again, mostly from Mark Bell, is it's really for fat loss and especially quick fat loss. Now, from what I can tell, again, from these influencers, they have a heavy focus on a goal to maintain single-digit body fat percentage year-round. And I'll tell you now, that's not going to work for females, and that's going to be pretty darn tough for males in terms of sustainability. I think it is also worth noting that Mark Bell, again, according to him, is on and off steroids, which does help people stay really lean, and also is just not going to align with what other people in this audience are doing, right? But so the idea here is fat loss and to get uber lean. Now, our audience knows that if they're going to get fat loss, you have to create a caloric deficit. And just generally, extreme diets are pretty good at creating caloric deficits. And the reason is because you just have this very limited number of things to eat. Like, it sounds fun to eat Sour Patch Kids and gummy bears, but like they kind of run their course a little bit, right? You just don't have that many things to choose from. And when you have fewer options to choose from, you generally eat less, at least in the beginning. And so this is where you get these stories of people losing, 10, 20 pounds in a month or whatever faster it is. And then months later, we find that they find loopholes in the diet. Like, there's people on keto who they end up not losing weight because they're just eating too much fat, or maybe they're just not able to sustain it. So they're on the diet for 3 days and then they eat whatever they want. And so they end up eating more calories. But generally that is how we're getting fat loss, is that they've created a caloric deficit, and it's pretty easy to do when you only have a few options to choose from. Now, the other claim that Mark makes is that you're eating way more, quote, way more on this diet. And again, I didn't watch all of his content, but he's basically not trying to refute calories in, calories out, but rather saying the diet revs or boosts your metabolism, meaning that your calories out increases by way of this type of eating, such that calories in can also increase. And so this is how you can be losing weight at a higher number of calories, because you've boosted calories out and you can therefore boost calories in. And so the relative relationship maintains, but you're at a higher total number.
Is there any science to that idea of, is there any, or I guess maybe what is the scientific rationale for that argument?
Yeah, from what I can see, there is actually some evidence of this. I don't totally know that it agrees with, Mark Bell's theories. Again, just looking cursory at some of the content, I think Mark has put out there that it's really the high sugar that's driving this increase in metabolism. But what it seems to be from this limited research that I've seen, it's actually the low protein that's driving this increase in metabolism. So there's a study by Nicolaisen in the show notes from earlier this year, March of 2025, and they took lean young men, now only 7 or 8 of them. So we got to be real careful with trying to extrapolate this to people. We have 7 or 8 people in this study. 7 or 8 men, and they put them on a low protein diet, basically the RDA level of protein, around 10% of calories, or about 0.38 grams per pound. They did this for 5 weeks. Now, the rest of their diet was high carb. Let's say 70% of the diet was carbohydrates, and then low fat, 20% of the diet was fat. And they found that the guys needed to eat about 20% more total calories than what they did prior to maintain their weight. So let's say 2,000 calories was what they were eating to maintain their weight prior to this experiment. They had to eat 2,400 calories so that they wouldn't lose weight. And they also found that when they were eating up at this 2,400 calories, despite the low protein, they did not change their body composition. Now, this experiment was interesting because then they repeated that experiment, I think, for another 5 weeks. They kept the protein low, but now they changed the ratio of carbs and fat to something that was more moderate. So the protein was down around 10%, and now they knocked the carbs down to around 40% of calories and bumped the fat up to about 50% of calories. And again, they found that the guys needed to eat about 20% more calories to maintain their weight. And so this suggests that it wasn't necessarily the high carb that was driving the increase in metabolism, but instead it's the low protein, because we had this change in the carb to fat ratio, we had the protein the same, and yet we saw the same increase in calories. And the authors attribute this to an increase in the hormone levels called FGF21, and basically it makes energy production less efficient. We've talked about kind of efficiency and metabolism before, but basically it requires more food to make the same amount of energy. I like to think about it as, okay, let's say somebody drinks a can of Coke on the sugar diet or something like that. Maybe that can of Coke used to give them enough energy to walk around the block 10 times. But now, because of this inefficiency in their metabolism, that energy that's created from that same can of Coke only gets them around the block 8 times. And so basically, hormones have the ability to change the efficiency of these chemical reactions, potentially necessitating you need more calories to do the same amount of work that you would day to day. So they're seeing that this type of diet distribution increases calories out, and therefore you would need to also increase calories in to maintain their weight.
Interesting. Okay, so if that's the sort of truth about the sugar diet, and assuming, though you haven't said it out rightly yet, that you're not recommending this diet, right, where do things start to fall apart?
Yeah. I mean, as soon as we're explaining the mechanism of a single hormone level to justify a diet plan, we've lost the plot. I can tell you we've lost the plot on a lot of levels. First of all, health isn't just about fat loss. Yes, maintaining a healthy weight is part of really protecting your health long term. And so that can be part of the overall picture to get after health. But when we look at the long term, we also have to start thinking about, like, are we getting adequate vitamins and minerals? What about fiber? And so that's a big problem with these diets out there, these trendy viral diets out there, is you might see the fat loss, and that can be great in certain circumstances for people who need to lose weight, but we don't ever really see what happens with this diet playing out in long term. Like, we're going to start to run into some nutrient deficiencies when you only drink soda. Right? We're going to not get enough fiber if we're only having fruit juice, right? So we have these, aesthetic goals, and we see that, but really we don't, and we see the quick changes, and that's really great, but we don't actually see what happens in the year plus trying to follow a diet like this. Okay, second, so one, it's not addressing all the nutrients we need. Second, if you want to stick to a diet, you actually need to enjoy it. And again, I joked around, it's like, I'm sure 800 grams of gummy bears sounds fun for a bit, but there's only so much you want of that. And yeah, on this diet, you can lean heavily into fruit, but you're not going to get the number of calories you actually need for the reasons that we've talked about before. And I think that's what so many of these diets overlook when they're thinking about, will this work and will this work in the long term? It's, does the person actually enjoy it? We can get so fixated on, like, wow, there's a boost in metabolism because of FGF21. But it's like, okay, does this person actually enjoy the diet long enough to stick to it? And that's what these biochemistry explanations never actually assess. They never actually look at the whole person and be like, is this something they can do for a year plus? Third, we already kind of hinted at it. The study that shows this increase in metabolism is really small. It's with 7 or 8 lean young men. It's for 5 weeks. Like, this is not the type of thing that we're then like, wow, this is going to happen in all populations. This is not necessarily going to happen with people that are overweight or sedentary. And even if it did work for all populations, we'd still have the prior concerns I mentioned. It doesn't address all the nutrients we need, doesn't necessarily address enjoyment and sustainability. Fourth, I think we actually need to be concerned with potential fructose content in this diet. Just because somebody is lean and maintaining a healthy weight doesn't mean that they can't have health problems. Certainly, it means that they've reduced their risk of health problems, but they can still have health problems. And we talked about this with our fructose episode, our fruit and fructose episode. But generally when people are eating fruit, it's much different than eating processed sugar sources like soda or maple syrup because the dose is so much lower. And so at these low doses, the small intestine will convert fructose to glucose before it reaches the liver, and we don't have a problem with too much fructose consumption. However, in a diet like this, where you're pretty much just slamming processed sugar, we may actually have a problem where the small intestine cannot convert all of the fructose, and therefore excess fructose does reach the liver, which is then converted to fat, and we might potentially be setting ourselves up in the long term, if anybody actually can stick to this, to cases of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And we find that about 20% of cases of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, people are actually lean. So it's not just going to happen when people gain weight. Again, whether or not this is actually going to happen is dependent if people can stick to this diet, which is unlikely, but certainly this would be a case where fructose consumption is a concern, unlike people fearing it from fruit. This would be a case where it's like, okay, we might actually be getting too much here.
I want to get into your theories as to why we have to keep talking about these diets and why they keep popping up. But before we do, you had mentioned something right at the top that I just wanted to revisit quickly, which is you were kind of making the point that, okay, well, 6 months ago, Mark Bell was talking about this and this guy was talking about this. How much do you feel like just the newness of it gets people excited and gets them convinced that this is the answer, and now I'm going to talk about this, and in 6 months it's just going to be something else?
Totally. I mean, I think that's exactly why a lot of these trends keep happening. I mean, I think there's multiple reasons why these trends keep happening, but I think shocking things sell, and I think new things sell. And I think these are combinations of both. I mean, it's shocking to tell somebody that they're going to eat 800 grams of sugar from gummy bears and Sour Patch Kids, right? But it's also new. And then you want to combine it with something like weight loss, I mean, that people really want. I think that's a big part of its overall kind of virality.
And it's also interesting because we live in this environment where people are like, their jobs are, okay, I've got to find something new to talk about. I have to find something new to quote unquote sell. And I say quote unquote because they might not actually be making any money off talking about the sugar diet, but they do make their money by having an audience and figuring out how to monetize that. So the incentive is, and it's been like this forever and ever, right? You look back even to the paleo days, like, okay, the paleo crew turned into the carnivore crew, turned into the next crew. And at some point, and I don't mean this cynically, but at some point they're like, well, I can't talk about carnivore anymore because I said everything, and now I've got to find the next thing to talk about. So there's this weird built-in incentive structure to find the next strange thing, talk about that for 6 months, and then move on to it when people are like, okay, we get it.
Oh, totally. 100%. We're very incentivized to create attention-getting content, and you do that by being new. And I think there's a lot of pressure for people to do that. Like, believe me, there's times, we've certainly discussed about different topics to discuss and different social media to discuss. And yeah, I could go down the rabbit hole of explaining all of these different supplements and stuff like that because it would be, quote, new content, but people don't need to hear it, right? That's not what they actually need. And so it's really unfortunate that that's how it's set up. But yes, people are very incentivized to do something that's attention getting, and new is very attention getting.
Yeah. 2 questions, answer however you'd like, which is anything else as it relates to your theories as to why these keep popping up? We talked about it a little bit, but in case we missed anything. But then 2, maybe more importantly, and a little bit to your point, which is how do we as the audience of all of this content, how do we make sure we don't fall for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that's really interesting about these trends keep happening, I say this to my masterclass all the time. I guess I've said it on the podcast as well, but the body is remarkably resilient, at least in the short term. You can do some really wacky stuff like the sugar diet and lean out, and it's going to be okay. The body will come back for that. You didn't just kill yourself or hurt yourself forever and ever. Now you might, if you continue to do it forever, and you might run into some nutrient deficiencies, as we mentioned, but the body's remarkably resilient. And so you can do these things that are very attention getting in the short term, and then, jump onto the next viral diet trend before problems crop up. And so I think that's why these trends continue to show up, because they're not so damaging to the people that it will then dissuade people from doing it. The body's resilient. The other thing that I wanted to say about kind of just the weight loss is forever until our media stops praising it and glorifying it is also just going to be such an easy sell, and showing off the ripped lean abs and praising that and glamorizing it. And, I was thinking about that as well related to diet trends. And I don't know that it's like we're inherently vain as much as I think there's that inherent want for approval.
Yep.
And so if that's what's kind of put out in the media as glamorized and what we should look like in quotes, then we're going to want to continue to seek that aesthetic so that we get the approval, right? So I think that's why these diet trends kind of keep coming around. In fact, there was this really interesting post by one of my coaches, sent it to me, Michael Easter, who wrote this post of like why diet trends keep going viral.
Yeah, and he's the author of The Comfort Crisis, for folks who recognize the name. Yeah.
And I guess there's some book of somebody who's looked at diet trends for the last 100 years. And so he kind of was summarizing that. And it's like people really latch on to the story that we've talked about. They latch onto the transformation. They latch onto this idea of like controlling their outcome and being that person at the end state. So all of this stuff is just like set up, ripe for us to jump on to these viral diet trends. And I wish it didn't work out that way. But yeah, okay, so I guess that's leading to your kind of second point there, is what's sort of the antidote for avoiding this stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think for anybody who's listened to, let's say, a handful of our episodes, that, you should just sort of hear something like that and think, okay, well, this isn't sustainable, I'm not interested. I think it can be hard to believe with the onslaught of content that we're dealt day in and day out on social media and online, but nutrition needs are really boring and basic. We don't really need anything new or different. And the more wacky it is, the more you're like, wow, that sounds crazy. The more you should be like, I don't think that's going to lead to results in the long term. Yeah. And that's because sustainability really requires flexibility. And that flexibility means that you have lots of different food options, not overloading meat, not overloading processed sugar, not avoiding processed sugar, not avoiding meat, unless, of course, you're doing it for ethical reasons, right? And if somebody advertises something like quick weight loss, you should definitely just turn around and run. And so I think those are kind of some of the tips that people should be looking for is you're not really looking for something new or different. What's really missing if you haven't achieved the success that you want with nutrition is not some weird wacky hack, but you're missing the consistency of the basics. And a lot of times I think what happens is people could start on some of these diets that are more basics related, let's sort of say 800-gram challenge protein. And the ultimate downfall is they're expecting the results they hear from the snake diet or from the sugar diet. They're expecting the 20 pounds lost in a month, such that when they're not seeing those quick results on something that's more sustainable, they give it up too quickly. And instead, it's like, no, you are actually on the right path. You just need to be sticking to those basics for longer, and then you're actually going to see the results. So I know that's not exactly your question, but I think if you're hearing all of this stuff about kind of quick weight loss, run away, if you're hearing stuff about super extreme diet choices, run away, and if you're still attracted to something like the sugar diet because of its quick fixes, you probably haven't wrapped your mindset around the idea of what truly a successful plan looks like. And that's really where you want to spend some time and be like, okay, what is this really going to look like for me to make the change, for me to stick to it in the long term? And that if you're still getting sucked into those things, it probably also means you're just not ready for what a truly sustainable plan will play out and look like to be successful.
So don't go on the sugar diet for 3 months and then do the lion diet for 3 months after that.
And the lion diet and the fruit diet. I feel like that would be a good little 6-month wave right there.
We
could go on all these things. I mean, I think we've talked about it before. I've done some really wacky viral diet trends myself. So I understand how you can fall for this stuff. But just trying to help people kind of ignore that type of content and refocus on what's going to get them results.
I would never volunteer for this, but do you remember the documentary probably 20 plus years ago, the Super Size Me documentary where Morgan Spurlock just ate McDonald's for, I don't even remember how long. It'd be kind of fascinating for somebody to go through, like, I'm going to spend 3 months on this diet and 3 months on this diet and 6 months. It would be interesting to see it play out in any sort of way in a single person, just to see what it actually looked like. All these sort of wacky. What was the dirt one we talked about? Oh, God.
Right, the eating dirt for the probiotics. Yeah, and I think what's also really interesting is 3 months. It depends what they eat as their protein source.
That's true. Yep.
there also can be times when that's not going to be long enough.
Yeah, I completely.
And
yeah.
yet there's even stuff on YouTube that's like, I ate only food from the gas station for 5 days. And it gets a ton of views because people are like, it's shocking, new, and interesting. But the body's so resilient that these 5-day, week-long, month-long challenges really aren't going to tell us anything besides like, oh, wow, that's wacky.
Yep. Yep. But but you can make that content a lot easier than I ate fruits and vegetables for 3 years. And now here's the result. That's a long time to make a single video.
I know. And believe me, there's some YouTube creators that sort of have come out of nowhere and they're just like, I ate this for a week type of stuff. You know, I ate the Costco hot dog only for a week. And like, people love it. But it's like, this isn't really how this is going to go, guys. Like, this is not really telling you anything about nutrition and dieting.
Yeah. All right, EC. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody out there for listening. Do make sure you are subscribed wherever you are listening or watching this so you don't miss another episode. EC and I will be back next week for a brand new episode of the Consistency Project podcast.
Thanks so much for tuning into the show today. So if you've listened to a couple episodes, you've probably heard me talk about the 800-gram challenge, that fruit and veggie thing, or lazy macros, where you add protein, or maybe even the 3 pillars method, when we also start looking at calories. Yes, this is the progression I have used in my masterclass as well as with my one-on-one clients to develop sustainable, personalized nutrition plans to lose weight, improve health, or have better performance at the gym. And it's available on my 3 Pillars Method app. This is not a tracking app. There's lots of those already. This is an app for inspiration, education, and accountability. You want to think about it like a coach in your pocket. So head on over to 3pillarsmethod.com to start your free trial of the 800-gram challenge. That's step 1. There's also options for gyms and corporate wellness programs. Again, that's 3pillarsmethod.com, and the link is in the show notes. I'll see you in the app.